Hi everybody, welcome back to 10 Minute Traveller. In this video I want to have a look at skills. Now in the Little Black Book number 1, around about page 16, you'll see that there's an area called Skills and Benefits. Skills are the tool that's used in the game to see if you can do something, and in general you can break skills down into a infinite amount of different variables. So for example, if you have the skill of art, then is it painting? Is it singing? Is it playing an instrument? Is it poetry? Traveller doesn't go into that level of detail with skills. There are some role-playing games out there that break things down an awful lot more. In classic Traveller, we started off with only a relatively small amount of skills. Now, once you've got used to the fact that this game was one of the very first to actually introduce skills this way, then you could see that there could be plenty of other skills that you could add to the system as you go. And indeed, in the books that come after books 1, 2 and 3, especially Mercenary, which is book 4, and Scouts, which is book 6, and Merchant Prince as well, that introduces a number of other skills into the game too. However, I'm only going to be talking about the skills that you can see in Book 1, although in my game, on Roll20, I'm going to be using all of the skills that come from all of the main first 7 books. So skills themselves, they have a number attached to them. You can have a skill of something. So for example, if I just open up my book here, I can see that there's some skills written on page 17, and one of the skills that's written there is air raft, for example. Now before we get into what an air raft is, essentially this is a piloting skill for a vehicle. Now skills in Traveller work slightly different from the idea that you have a number that's associated with the skill and that shows how good you are with that. Certain skills are very basic, and what they actually are there for is to have some sort of representation for the level of experience that you've got in that skill. You can have a skill of 0 in Traveller, which sounds a little bit counterproductive, but the way that it works is this. If you don't have a skill in something, let's take our air raft for example, a skill of nothing in air raft, which is different from 0, so no skill at all, is you can't actually use that vehicle without taking some very, very hard negative modifiers. Could be a negative modifier of something along the lines of something like -5. Now the way that skills work in Traveller is that you're always looking to get an 8 or more when you're rolling your dice. So when you're taking your 2d6 and you're rolling your 2d6, what you're looking for, and I'm lucky here obviously, is that you're looking for 8 or more. Now if I'm trying to use my air raft but I have no skill in it at all, the keeper or the dungeon master, or in this terminology that we have, the referee, will say, well, you've got no idea how that works, you are at -3. So at -3 I've rolled an 8 -3, so I can just take away that dice to represent it, I get a 5, which means that essentially I don't know how to actually use the vehicle. Somebody could jump in, switch it on, and you just have to, you have to press a button or use the joystick or something. Now that may give you a modifier, so if somebody else knows how to actually get it started and get it moving, maybe that -3 could go to -1. That still would have meant that I would have been in a situation where I wouldn't have been able to actually use the vehicle very well. A skill of 0 is not a minus. So when we go back to the roll that I made, if I just put my die back onto the table here, that would have been a skill of 3 + 5 + 0, which would have been 8. And that being the number that I needed, or more, then I could get the vehicle to do roughly what I wanted it to do. A skill of 1 would add 1 to this, and my overall roll would be 9. A skill of 2 would be 10, and so on and so forth. And that's essentially the way that it works. Now, Different referees will probably have different opinions on what skills can be set to 0, what skills can have -5 or -3 or -2 if you don't have them. It's not unusual for people to start playing Traveller to have very few skills, so you're actually starting the game at what feels to be a massive disadvantage. It shouldn't really be that way too much, I suppose, for everybody, but it's something that you would need to consider. Also consider that the premise of Traveller is usually to travel between different places, usually using equipment like a spaceship. In that respect, you can't really have many characters that start the game at least with all of the necessary skills to be able to fly that ship. If you have a look through some of the skills that you can see in Book 1, and you just go through a few as we go through here, you'll see that things like computer and electronics and gunnery, for gunnery of a ship's gun, and there's a few other ones, engineering at the top there. I'm just pointing out the ones that might be necessary for what I'm going to be talking about: mechanical, medical, navigation and pilot. All of these skills are required for running a spaceship, and unless you are extremely lucky and you stay in the services when you create your character for an awful long time, then it's unusual to get a character that has one or more in each of those skills when you get started, which means that you'll probably need a navigator, you'll probably need a pilot, you'll probably need a mechanic or a medical officer or whoever it may be to make the whole ship work smoothly. Think of that when you're making your characters. Think of that when you're trying to put together your character in the services that you're in. You see that when you build a character, and that's what I'm going to be coming up to next in my next video, when you're building a character, you have to make some choices before you start building it. What do you want to try and do? Do you want to be a pilot? If you want to be a pilot, then there's not really much point being a soldier. If you want to be a medical officer, then there's not really much point being a merchant, and so on and so forth. So you'll have to look through what's available before you start making the characters. Now, it's possible to move between different types of characters to get the job done. That's possible, yes, but it's not always the best way of doing things. So those are the skills. That's really it when it comes to skills. It's a very simple thing. The second area of this video that I want to just touch on is experience and training. Now, with experience and training, what I'm talking about here is that in a lot of role-playing games, you have something called experience points. Traveller doesn't have that. So there are no experience points in Traveller to have. If you've played D&D before, you'll know that completing a scenario, killing a creature, liberating a town or something will get you a certain amount of experience points. In Traveller, there are no experience points to have. So the way that it works in Traveller is that it takes a much more realistic view about how you would learn something new. And the way that you would learn something new is that you need to be trained in it. You need to be educated in it. Now, your education score is going to come into play here if you want to teach people or know where you can get information from. But ultimately, training takes time. I tend to look at the idea of where you're going from place to place, and if it takes an awful amount of time, then say, well, this is the best time to understand what you want to try and train in. I think it's worthwhile that a group actually comes together and discusses what they want to train before they actually get started in the game, or at least in parts of the game, so they can move towards a common goal. There are certain skills, again, that people will gravitate to. Piloting, again, is one of them. Possibly gun skills, survival skills, and people can teach each other those. But it is vital that you understand that training is not a day or a week-long thing. It happens over months. It can even happen over years. So there we are. That's skills and a little bit of training in there. And that's it for this video. In the next video, I'm going to be looking at what we need to do to create those characters. Okay then, everybody. Thanks very much.